Let's do it.
How are you?
You're sounding good. I'm good, man. How you doing?
Good, good, good.
Can you hear the coffee grinding in the back?
No. You got
Wow,
some,
fuck.
yeah,
The mic is doing work. It's amazing. Can't believe you can't hear that. It's loud as shit.
I'm actually going through caffeine withdrawals right now too. I started
Uh,
a quick coffee like I don't know a couple days ago, and it's just been like
wow.
it's
What,
crushing.
like for good?
Yeah, well, for a while at least. Like I'm just like I'm gonna try to get it all out. Do about a month where it's just nothing but good stuff. And
Have you done it before?
coffee, yeah, coffee's tough, man. So it's three days in the beginning where you're just like dying, right?
Oh,
Like
it's brutal.
you got
Yeah.
headaches and everything else, and you get through that third day, you're fine. But like,
Yeah. Yeah. Like anything. I don't know, man. It's kind of my last remaining vice. And I don't know if I want to give it up, like,
I didn't either, but I was like, man, it's either now or during the apocalypse, and like shit's gonna be going down. I need a clear head.
All right, let me if you don't have any questions, I'll just fire up the live stream and we'll just keep going.
Yeah, right on. Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, to everyone just joining, we're just talking about Shane giving up coffee. What's the motivation?
So I actually had some guys come in to do a kind of a promo for the show. We were going to do sponsorship and all that kind of stuff, and it was a like a mushroom type of elixir, and I'm without saying names or anything. And I was like, guys, I definitely do this, and I want to give it a fair shake. So I was like, I'm gonna quit coffee, and I've wanted to quit coffee for a while anyway. And so I was just like, well, now's the time. Let's try it out. If this is gonna be my morning, my morning upper, and see what happens for clarity and everything else. So I started, and at the same time was taking these elixir things, and I got to tell you, I don't think the elixirs are going to work out. But at the same time, yeah, I was at the same time I said, what, the coffee needs to go. And I've already replaced a bit with a multi mushroom. I don't know if you take one or not, but it's they come in all sorts of different things these days, whether it's like a coffee replacement or a pill. I prefer the pill, so it's a lot cheaper, and you can just pop them and be done with it. So that was kind of the impetus behind it. I wasn't really a glutton for punishment. It's not why I wanted to go through like 3 days of hell and headaches and everything else.
Right. Well, two questions off that. So like why did you want to remove like the coffee effect? Was it just like a jittery thing or mental clarity, or you just didn't like the idea of having a dependence? Like, what was it?
It's I guess a bunch of things. I was not kidding. Like when I was like, when the whole system melts down, I don't want to be dependent on coffee when shit's going down. Right? Like, kind of a funny.
You're really preparing yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think stuff is about to get pretty nuts, and coffee is not going to be one of those things that's in high supply around the northern Georgia mountains. So,
Right.
The other part of it is I think with a lot of things, whether it's cannabis or whether it's caffeine or whatever it is that you're putting in your body like on a daily basis, you kind of just get numb to the idea that it's there. First and foremost, it's doing something, and then long-term effects of any drug, right? It's just like if you get too I'm gonna say burnt out, but like if you're taking things like cannabis on a daily basis, although it may not really physically harm you or anything, it's still having an effect on your entire being, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever. And so to just kind of divorce yourself from all of these kind of things at the same time to really kind of get a baseline, man, I'll tell you, it's been a while since I've done this, and it feels good. It feels, minus the headaches, right? Like, but there is something to kind of getting back to a flat, like this is the basis, this is where the body's at. I'm 43 these days, and so you're trying to see what's working, what might need some attention, what might just be fairly neglected, and try to bring everything back into balance.
Yeah. I mean, my primary, I guess, physical and mental, like the thing that drives or informs that approach is that neutral space. Like I want to experience as much mental clarity as possible. And obviously that requires a lot of physical effort as well, because you don't feel mentally clear if your body is a sack of shit and you're not using it, and you're not stressing it and all that kind of stuff. And so I get it, and I've basically everything I do in the morning and throughout the day is to try to get myself to a place where I'm minimally influenced by forces that I'm either not aware of or I don't want to be influenced by. And then the presumption is like, well, then you're as in control as you can be, of your mind, your body, your thoughts, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, you can do stuff. You can write, you can think about things, you can, pursue goals, you can build things. Like you're as much you as you can be. And, there's almost a faith in there that like, that is the place you should be in. That is the place that you're most able to draw on your strength and your ingenuity and all that kind of stuff. And, so I feel you, I've done the coffee. I've cut coffee before, and I guess I probably should again. I mean, this is all just a long-winded excuse, more than likely, most likely. But I don't find it influences things negatively that much. But I can say if I don't have it, I do get the headaches and stuff. So just from a pure physiological dependence perspective, it is there. The other one I've done before, because I mentioned that I don't have many vices, but I do have a bit of a sweet tooth, and I've done these like complete no sugar periods before. I think I've done like the longest one has been 2 months, and basically it's kind of like overt sugar, so no like refined carbs, no fruit, and no refined sugar. So to whatever extent there's sugar in like carrots and beets and whatever else, then that is presumably inconsequential. And for the first 3, 4, 5 days, you're irritable, you've got headaches, you got crazy cravings. But then when it breaks, I mean, you are in like a really kind of zen state, a really clear state. And of course, I mean, this kind of alludes to or reinforces the practice of fasting that a lot of different spiritual traditions have engaged in throughout the ages. And I presume that's one of the reasons, because it gets you to that place. Not only are you kind of not being subjected to the influence or the forces of what you're eating, but then of course you're also contending with all the internal struggle and strife of not, giving yourself sustenance. And that in itself can be a very, if you can get through that, then, you can get to a place where perhaps more wisdom is available to you, for lack of a better term.
I totally agree. And that's the thing is sugar is one of those that I think, especially for our generation, that was slid kind of under the radar. Sugar became a really widely not only accepted but indulgent type of practice. There was these Dove commercials talking about indulgence in chocolate and all these other things, and obviously the population swelled up over that time. But when you really try to quit sugar, whether it's refined, whether you'll still introduce fruit into your diet, honey and things like that, those first few weeks, sometimes I know that's when I think I went 3 or 4 months one time without any type of refined sugar. And at that point, your body feels amazing first and foremost,
Yeah.
and you start to change your mind about like this craving for sweets versus looking at them and understanding what they are, and acknowledging, hey man, it's a drug, it's a poison, it's going to mess with your system, whether it's your pancreas, your blood levels, your serotonin levels even, so it's got some type of mental effect on you. And to be able to clear these things out, I think sugar is probably one of the most overlooked in terms of drug addictions, especially here in America. And so if you can get yourself to a real clarity point, like it is you get to start from a baseline, and you get to work. I'm not saying that I don't appreciate things like the cannabis and the psilocybin and things like that. If you're looking for introspection, if you're looking for creativeness, things like that, if you're looking to tap into an artistic side or something like that, I think there's definitely an added advantage with, especially the cannabis on that side. If you're for the psilocybin on more of the communication with the almighty and this mystical realm that a lot of people you may not be very familiar with, is an aid, it's a tool, but it's not one of those things that you're ever going to be like, oh yeah, let's go out and do like 7 grams of psilocybin on a daily basis. That's not how it works.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I think the key with with a lot of that stuff. I mean, again, I do think it's about being at least conscious, if not fully in control of the things that are influencing you, right? So you might know what your neutral state is, but you might say, well, I'm not going to go on, a 3-month sugar fast, and I'm not going to cut out coffee, but at least you have some degree of consciousness over the things that are influencing you. And I think it's the same with things like cannabis and psilocybin. Like, if you're intentional with your use of these things, you're like, okay, I have a particular goal in mind, and this is the tool for that particular goal. And so I'm using it in this, set and defined period and circumstance and time and all that for this purpose. And then when it's done, and I go back to neutral. And so, for me, that's been the case for a long time. It's like you keep trying to tweak it, right? So you keep trying to find what your neutral is. And it takes a long time, right? You try different diets, you try different exercise regimes, you try different, sleep methods and supplements and whatever your thing is. And, slowly over time, you kind of close in on what makes you feel the most alert, the most, confident, strong, capable, all those different things. And then when you need to dip your toes into maybe the creative waters and a selective use of cannabis, when you need, for me, what's typically been an annual dipping my toes into the mystical realm, that's psilocybin. And that's kind of just cleaning house fully and, moving into whatever we call that space. And I think that's a big thing. We talk about like the NPC crowd a lot in Bitcoin and stuff like that. And I think one of the hallmarks of people like that is they're just so unaware of the different forces that are influencing them, that are directing them, that are guiding them. And I mean, this of course is not only in the realm of food, but certainly that, as you say, sugar and alcohol and seed oils and all these different things that are just fucking with their brains and clouding their perspective and their, all that stuff. But then of course you layer on top the media, and then you layer on top, the system of the society and the culture that they're nestled within, and all the different signals they're getting from that. And you get this amalgam of a person that is almost completely a product of these forces that are being exerted on them, that are not in their control, that are not consciously chosen, that they're not aware of the degree to which these things are affecting them. And then you get, automata, right? You get this just automatic behavior. You know what responses will come from this composite person that's allowing all these forces to guide their perspective, or to construct their perspective and guide their behavior. And then you have what seems to be a growing cohort of people now that are starting to realize that they've been subject to a hell of a lot of conditioning, a hell of a lot of substances and ideas and, cultural signals and all that kind of stuff that hasn't been serving them, and certainly hasn't been in their control. And there's, I think a lot of people are saying, hold the fuck on. Something is completely awry. If for no other reason, even if I'm not that able to see what's fucked up about the world, it's not working for me. I'm unhappy. I'm depressed. I'm stressed. I'm anxious. Why should, that shouldn't be my natural state. And I think, the first step is like shedding everything. It's kind of like going on an elimination diet, right? I don't know what's fucking with me. So it's all got to go. I'll start with water, and then I'll layer it back on. And I'll wait and see it until I can find the thing that's messing with me. And it seems like a lot of people are doing that now. And it's great, because hopefully we're getting more awake, more in control of their own, people more in control of their own minds. And, then as far as it's relevant to what you and I spend a lot of time on, you got to find Bitcoin at some point if you do that,
Well, it's funny how it all kind of works together. I'm actually working on a book called The Communications Protocol right now, and you talk about this understanding in people that something's not right, and whatever it is, I've got to get back to the base layer of whatever that is. And I started going down this path. I was, a Marine. I was in special operations overseas during the early 2000s, right when we were, doing the first invasions into Iraq and all that kind of stuff. And I found a book that was by a great teacher. His name was John Taylor Gatto, and he wrote about the school system in America, how it had come from Prussia. And the name of the particular book that got me kind of set down this path of questioning, right? It was like, all right, what's the base? Where do I need to strip this down to? Because you find what you think is the base, and then you figure out all the cracks and flaws in it, and then you
Mm.
get down even further and further and further. The name of that book was the history of the underground education of America. Fascinating book, but this is something that people are waking up to now. We may have a little more experience with it. Waking up, maybe quite a bit ago. Like this was almost 20 years ago, for God's sakes.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, now that I'm 20 years into this journey, and also running this new post traumatic stress mission called B.R.A.V.E that works with psilocybin. You're able to kind of locate this and give people an out, right? Like it's corrupted code, and it's one of those things where, like you're saying, you've got all these outside influence. Well, that outside influence is corruption. It's not so much that you are corrupt. It's not that would have made all these choices had it not been for a lot of these influences. A lot of what you're instilled with and indoctrinated with in America, especially, and mostly around the world, because let's face it, the colonial type of education system that came out of Prussia is one of indoctrination, so that you find people that are very homogenous in their culture, so that when the state says let's go do something, they don't get a lot of pushback, and that
Mm.
includes up into war. When the pie's not growing, it's very easy for these dictators and tyrants to say, you know what, let's go take from these people who can't defend themselves. So when we do these assessments and take people out for maybe their first dose of psilocybin to kind of have a more spiritual look, and a departed look from exactly who they think they are, that part where you begin to explain corruption to them as coming in from the outside, being indoctrinated to think a certain way, having all these things at your fingertips, whether it's porn or sugar or drugs or alcohol or all this part of your culture. And something that we don't talk about a lot of in this culture is like even EMF, right? Like electromagnetic frequency. And when you begin trying to strip all these things out and getting grounded, like really grounded, you start to see these phenomenal changes in people, to where they go, wow. And then the coolest thing is about all this is they begin to forgive themselves for maybe some of the, like, I hate to call them transgressions, but you know what I mean? It's one of
Mhm.
those things where maybe their path didn't go the way they thought it would, or they were duped into something, or they were, it was this homogenous culture that said this is okay to do. Like for me, example, to have that, idea that I should be going overseas and doing terrible things in a land with people who are not a threat to us in the least, right? For
Yeah.
what? For freedom? Come on, right? To be able to get past the fact that you were indoctrinated, made some decisions based on that, and then pushed through and found something, and now you're starting to help other people wake up. You can do some really amazing things once you get down to that baseline.
Totally. And as you're saying that, I cover psychedelics a lot on this show just because it's been such a meaningful tool or experience in my development. But it's almost, I mean, you could almost characterize you want to be careful when you're talking about these things because everyone's experience is subjective, and
Yeah.
not everyone has the same experience, of course, and there's so many nuances. But I think I can safely say, whatever your path there seems to be a pinnacle of that experience, whatever it might be for you. But for me, it has been that kind of like equivalent of that cognitive neutral. Like you're in the ultimate neutral, and perhaps that's why it can be so helpful in helping people see through all the conditioning, all the corruption that they've been subject to, and with which they've constructed their identity, who they are. And it gives a moment where it's like, boom, it's all gone. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, what the hell is left? Like, what is this awareness that's even perceiving now when it's not contextualized with all these ideas and identities and associations and histories and all that kind of stuff? And I mean, that's a interesting and tough question to answer, but suffice it to say that it's giving people sometimes very like roughly, and in a, a lot of people may not be ready for that sort of
Yeah.
experience, because you do basically undress everyone and they're down to what's fundamental. And then it begs the question, like, well, what is fundamental? Here I am, just like I can feel that I'm not all those things that I've been told I was or that I've thought I was. So what am I? And whatever your answer to that may be, maybe it's pure consciousness, loving awareness, pure energy, united with the, you know,
Right.
with everything, who knows? But it's from that, I think that's the place where then you can consciously reconstruct. And so when you come out of that experience, you know, you come back into your ego and what's familiar and all your bad habits and your you know, your long held beliefs. They don't just disappear immediately, but now there's a space there, and you can say like, do I want this? Let's call it an idea. Is this an idea that I should hold on to, or I should let go, or upgrade, or update, or whatever? Because it just wound up there, and maybe I didn't put it there myself. I just, as you said, family, country, all the different conditioning. And what I find so interesting, and why I love these conversations, and is that, you know, there's so many people now asking profound questions about, you know, who and what they are or should be, and what they should value, what are valid motives for action and ambition. And, you know, and it's so exciting because we are seemingly coming out of, like, hopefully the apex of this Leviathan culture and system, inculcating people to such a degree that they basically lose control of their agency. You know, people like to think that they're free. I mean, even if we discard the political argument, like, you know, oh, we're free, but we, you know, we're told we can't do this, that, and the other thing. And what often happens is people just, their notion of their own freedom conforms to the parameters that they've been permitted, you know. But even beyond the political, it's like, are you really free if you're not in control of your own mind? If, like, what is being able to choose freely? What is the exercise of free will if you don't have total control over your own mind, if you're at least not aware of the things that are influencing that? And so, you know, you could broadly say that this process is the process of people everywhere becoming more free. And then when that happens, the really juicy question that requires all this dialogue is, well, what the hell do you do with it? You know, what is it worth? What should you be doing? You know, if you're not just direct, you come out of the fiat meat grinder education system and you get spit out onto some, you know, corporate ladder that you know, ticks the box of status and income and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's not the automatic thing to pursue, what is it?
Yeah. So you got to figure out, what is your passion. This is, as I think, it's one of the scariest questions in the world for some people. It's like, what do you automatically love doing, and then how do you live off of that, or can you live off of it? Can you figure it out? That's a scary question for a lot of people, because I don't think a lot of people have a real passion. You know, and that's the thing, is I
Right.
think
It hasn't been
people
cultivated.
they've been, yeah, exactly right. And that's one of the things, you know, I talk about passion being fostered. You know, we homeschool our kids, and you know, when you foster passion, what you allow is for a genius to take root. You know, and as a genius takes root, they put their own look, their own spin, their own work effort, and everything else into that passion. What they do is they become a genius of whatever subject material that they're working with, and they'll work day and night, year after year after year. You know, what seems to be just, you know, mania almost, to a degree, to some people, but
Mm.
because they see something, they see, you know, what the in well, at least what they have in the short term, maybe some long term goals, but it makes sense to them. They see the map for it. And so when you push, you know, this passion, and allow passion to develop, you start to have people that go, yeah, you know what? This is what I can do. And I know it's much harder for adults to sit there and be like, man, I'm going to reinvent myself. Whether, you know, you're part of the boomer generation, or, you know, maybe Gen X, or maybe even an elderly millennial, like you've kind of been the tail end of the analog, you know, for the analog generations, for, you know, what it's worth. And now you're looking at new digital generations that can do this much easier, much faster, without having, you know, a lifetime of like regrets and things that they have to get over. So when you do get to that baseline and you ask yourself those questions, you're like, all right, what's left? What am I supposed to do? First and foremost, I think, you know, a lot of times what you're left with is like, well, I've got to love people, right? Like, I've got to love people. And what you're talking about in terms of that, like that mental influence, there was something that we used to talk about in terms of the Marine Corps. It was OODA loop. that space between your ears, that's yours, it's your fortress. And when you're in control of this, you can do damn near anything you want. And that was
What's
a
it called?
really, it's called the OODA loop.
OODA
um
loop.
yeah, it's your mind. And so if you're the master of your mind, it means that you're cognizant of what's not only going into it, but you're also very in control of what's going on in it. And so if you start to, pity yourself, if you start to, get to the point where you're questioning, all these things, and don't get me wrong, this gets corrupted as well. But in a pure sense, if you're using this tool, this OODA loop understanding, you can start to change yourself. There's a great doctor, now deceased. His name was Dr. Hawkins, and he talked about this in terms of different levels of consciousness. And what you see on the lower levels of consciousness that actually resonate at lower frequency is anger, shame, pity, things of that nature. Only do you get to kind of a baseline, a mid-level form of consciousness at courage, because courage is now the impetus to address what you might have been going through. And so what you're always trying to do is get out of that lower zone and get into that upper zone, the joy, the happiness, the feeling of one. And when you start to transcend what you and identify, first and foremost, I guess probably talk about that for a second, is when you identify that you are feeling shame or pity on yourself or anger or any of these things that are lower vibration, then you have the ability to sit back and say, all right, man, what am I doing? What's going on in my mind? Do I need to do a reset here where I go back to being thankful for my breath? Do I need to do, because that's the foundation. The foundation is if you can get down to, man, I'm breathing. Okay, breathe, right? And you start from there and then work your way up. And you start, the grateful task accumulation, where you're going around in your mind at least saying, hey, you know what? Thank you for my health. Thank you for my family. Thank you for like all of these things, and taking stock of what's good. Now that OODA loop begins to change, back. And if you do this long enough, it's like it's a muscle, right? It's like anything else.
Mm.
You get to the point where you can automatically do these kind of things and keep your mind, that fortress, that OODA loop, where at least I have this. Things could be extremely worse off than they are now. And that's kind of the piece that, where this, like what I'm trying to get people to understand is that OODA loop is yours. And as you work through this, as you strengthen it, as you, grow and understand that ladder of consciousness that Dr. Hawkins was talking about, you really have the ability to be the master of your own mind, and then therefore the master of your own life.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember when I first had the epiphany that like I wasn't my thoughts, because a hella weird shit flies through your brain on any given moment, right? And if you associate with all that, then how are you going to think anything of yourself, really? I mean, you're just going to think you're a psychopath, basically. But it's,
You might be.
yeah, you may be, but and maybe you need that space to assess it, and that's kind of the point. Like not only allowing you to be subject and like let the be the tail to which your thoughts wag, and have a space there where you're able to assess what you're thinking. And you might still see some weird shit and be like, why am I thinking that? And that might guide you in the direction of like, what do I, the thing for me was always the power of, I mean, it's so funny to me as an aside here, like what seems to be happening culturally right now amongst like perhaps the cohort that we're somewhat a part of is like the fusing of like the uber masculine, right? Like just gritty, hard, combat experience, fighting, working out, whatever, with like the woo-woo hippie stuff from before, and we're just finding the proper synthesis and balance between them. But one of the for me the most powerful, I recognize really the power of belief, because I would think like, why do I have this thought, or why do I like this thing? Like, where's the source of that even preference? Because we don't consider it often, but I could say like, hey, do you like pineapple on pizza? And you'd be like, God, no. And I might say, well, choose that preference, right? That's just something you noticed. You're just responding to that. And oftentimes I think it's, maybe not for pineapple on pizza, but because that maybe your taste buds are a bit more cultivated by, your upbringing and your early experiences and stuff like that. But I think beliefs go a long way to informing how we reflexively respond to things. And so for me early on, I was like, okay, well, how do I change those to orient me in a direction that I think is more valuable or healthy or whatever? And that's a tricky question, right? Because the beliefs are another thing that you can't trick yourself into believing something. You do or you don't, and you kind of it becomes axiomatic in how you act and how it motivates you. And but I kind of obsessed with that question, and to me, the way it seemed to me the best approach was to try to find truth, because at a minimum, if you do that, then your belief will be most coherent with what is. And that seemed like the best place to be coming from. And that ended up being cool, right? Because that's a hallmark of truth, is that like, if you really believe it to be true, then that's the process of inculcating a certain belief. Now, the slippery slope there, the razor's edge is, if you're wrong, it's going to exact the same effect. You're going to act as though it's true, and that's going to inform all your actions, and it's going to lead you astray because it's in fact not. And, there's many examples of that in society today. But I think that is why, in Bitcoin, broadly speaking, not only because Bitcoin is kind of a so-called truth machine, but I think there's this general reverence for truth. And this is why honesty and integrity is, upheld so much and reinforced, and people that don't exhibit it are often ridiculed and stuff like that. And I think it's, this growing reverence for truth. And for me, that was always came in tandem with trying to somehow, without tricking myself, cultivate beliefs that I felt would naturally incline me towards the behaviors that I thought were most beneficial. Because if it was just a matter of discipline, and I'm sure we've all been there, like early in life, oh, I want to eat right or I want to work out or whatever. But if it was just like hardcore, stubborn, I'm going to fucking get up and do it because I think it's right, but the little voice in the back of your head is like, I'd rather just chill out on the couch. I mean, for me, that just ended up being exhausting. I was like, this, like,
Yeah.
I'm a pretty disciplined person. I got a lot of willpower, but it's just, the internal battle is exhausting. But if that voice went away, because the more fundamental belief was that I wanted to do a thing because it was going to deliver to me the most desired thing, right? It was going to deliver to me the thing that I wanted. Then that voice just completely went away. There would be no more friction in pursuing the actions, the courses of action that were going to deliver to me what I wanted. And yeah, so, for me, the cultivation of the neutral mind space was important, because that's the only way, in my opinion, you have a shot at pursuing truth, right? Because you're getting rid of the distortions, you're getting rid of the noise, so that you can better pursue truth. And as a result of doing that, you're able to cultivate beliefs that will allow action to flow more easily in the direction that, is presumably beneficial for you.
Yeah, it also allows for the cultivation of knowledge. And when you're trying to find truth, you're not that person who's defensive about your beliefs. You're the
Right,
person
right.
who's questioning your beliefs. That this Bitcoin space is one of those that I find really really interesting, because as dogmatic as we can seem, we are also those people who want to speak. We're like with other people, and it's not just to be heard, but we want to hear what other people have to say. And I think there's a lot of truth just in understanding who is willing to come to the table to have conversations versus who is never going to be available to be questioned. If you're never available to be questioned, you're living in a dogmatic world where you've got some fallacies that are mixed up there. You've got some some real mental, I guess the word I'm looking for is cognizance. It's being, I don't know, exploited by, I think, a fiat system, for the lack of a better term, right? You've got some cognitive dissonance going on, and when you can't have these conversations, when you don't feel like you can teach somebody or share with somebody, whatever the truth you think you found. Like, I know for us, I mean, it's damn near, how do you, like, how do you know if somebody's a Bitcoiner at a party? Don't worry, they'll tell you. It's kind of like a pilot, right? It's like they're going to tell you, like, they want to talk about it in whatever degree you'll talk about it with. Um, and they will teach, and they'll sit there for sometimes hours and hours with somebody who's really, trying to learn something, or challenging their belief system. And I think that's one of the telltale signs that that truth that you're seeking out, this really, this understanding of what life is, what the purpose of all this is, where we're going as a species, that broader picture. I think that's one of those things where Bitcoiners do themselves a lot of justice, is not looking at now, that, that long time, horizon, and they're not focused on the here and now, like so many people in this this world are, especially the ones that have a lot of power. This fiat system that we're seeing now is just, oh boy. I mean, after watching WEF this last week, it was, you see it and you're just like, boy, these guys are right here, right now. They act like they're, talking about the future, but when you really boil it down, what they're doing is trying to mitigate the blowback from, when the entire thing implodes.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things about Bitcoiners that I think is interesting, it's often just kind of labeled low time preference, right? Stack sats, think towards the future, don't delay gratification, basically. And that's all true. But I think, to your point, like the mentality of someone who, wants to be right all the time, and it wants to impose their existing set of beliefs, let's say, or ideology on other people. And this type of person that we were referring to before, which is just like gobbling up this unconscious signal, from everywhere. It's almost like that. You're not surprised that that instills or is a result of a, a perspective of desiring immediate gratification. I want the gratification of being right. I want the gratification of the shitty food. I want the gratification of the reinforced belief. I want the gratification of my, daddy government telling me everything's going to be okay, and so on and so forth. Where it seems like, people in Bitcoin, and maybe people along the lines, even if they're not in Bitcoin, that have a perspective like the one we've been discussing, there's a profound sense, there's a sufficient comfort in and confidence in who they are at a fundamental level,
Yeah.
that they don't need the gratification of all those different kinds. Like you don't need, because, a lot of, for example, back to the point about eating, a lot of eating is emotional, right? Why do you eat the bucket of ice cream? Why do you go for the chips? I mean, it's not just, your taste buds are referring to something, right? It's like, and so I think a lot of it is emotional. And if you're good, right, if you've put into work, if you're starting to understand yourself, if you're striving for more, more clarity of mind, let's say, I think you're more capable of resisting that gratification. And
Yeah.
and I think that happens in all areas, to the point where you push away the need for all that gratification, and then, like we were saying before, it's like, well, what's left? Well, what's left is seemingly a fairly honest perception or appraisal of oneself, like
Mm-hmm.
who and what one is, and then a greater clarity on what is truly of the greatest value to people. And, what do you know? It ends up not being all those things that typically are in the category of immediate gratification, Lambos, ice cream, winning debates, whatever. And it's those more, for lack of a better term, metaphysical doesn't capture it all, but it's like, well, you want strong and healthy and loving relationships, and you want a strong, healthy body, and you want, to spend time in nature, and you want to do work that's where the most important variable is how meaningful it is for you, and not, what the immediate rewards might be. And so it's like all of those pursuits end up now being both a result of, and probably reinforcing, this you having shrugged off the need for them to gratify whatever element of you it might be. And I think, again, broadly speaking, that's what constructs and reinforces a positive, healthy culture versus the one we have now.
Yeah, it also leads to a culture of independence, and I think that's a really interesting thing because a lot of times, especially in America, we talk about independence and we celebrate things like the 4th of July when most people are extremely independent. You still got me? Yeah.
Change my AirPods are fucking up.
Yep,
AirPods
I
are
got you.
fucking
Hold
up.
on.
You're good.
Yeah, all right. One of the things that breeds in a culture is independence, and I was saying like the idea of independence in America is just an idea. It's not a way of life. And when you can go in and you can have these battles with yourself, and this is a thing I don't think a lot of people are very comfortable with. The idea of going in and combating yourself, like taking a look at what's really messed up or what could use improvement or what your foundations are. I don't think a lot of people are ready for that battle. I don't think they're ready for the struggle of questioning themselves because I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I get enough questions from everybody else in my life, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't need to get in here and actually battle myself. There's this thing that we talk about a lot of times is the corruption of the warrior spirit as well. And I'm not saying it's all people who have ever been in the military. No, this idea of independent culture and the perversion of the warrior spirit, I think, is kind of one and the same. Actually, is where if you're strong enough to go in and have these understandings, these real debates with yourself, these knockdown, drag out, like going through the ringer type of trips a lot of times with psilocybin. If you're willing to do these, and I think a lot of times you find that a lot of guys who have the post traumatic stress, and that's just people in general. Like that's not exclusive to veterans. For everybody has trauma, everybody has stress, and so to be able to go in and address these things, what you start to do is you start to have people who really understand what does give them appreciation, what does give them passion, what does give them value in terms of the work that they're doing. And when they begin to do these works, when they begin to settle into a new type of lifestyle and take that path, the perception that somebody is going to come out through force and coercion and put their hand out or possibly escalate to saying we're going to use coercion or we're going to use force up into including taking your life. I think that's what this does. I think this is where this independent warrior class of people who can do the self, and I guess fighting, they can go in and do battle with themselves and then turn it to the outside to where they are cultivating passion. This is where a culture becomes more independent, because an independent culture that is so passionate about what they're doing and how they're living, that is a hard people to take advantage of. It is a hard people to coerce. At some point they go, you know what, if I can't do this with my life, then maybe life isn't worth living, and I'm going to do anything and everything within my power to protect these things. I think that's a really amazing point, like in terms of like especially the psilocybin side. And I think this this regime that's out there, and I'm not just saying like it's the US, the banking cabal, that I think is probably holding hands with the church, obviously politicians and big business. For a long time they've said, yeah, like all this stuff is forbidden. This is Schedule 1 stuff. You can't touch it. It's outlawed in damn near every nation around the world. And now that we're starting to get a foothold again where we can get our hands on very good quality and education in terms of the shamanic ways that have started to come back and return and spread, this is something that I think has been organized for a very, very long time to prevent people from being that warrior class and being very independent.
Yeah, well, it'd be hard to argue with that. It's uh, I can see. Well, I mean, I always let's talk about it this way because you mentioned the WEF people a moment ago, and we've been talking about how I so many people are walking around and effectively they're not in control of their thoughts, right? Nor are they aware of perhaps the the things they need to be to what's the way of putting it? I mean, people are so blind to even what they should be striving for, like that they haven't had the experience yet to cause them to wake up. And like, I almost hate using that term because I'm being incredibly presumptuous by saying like, oh, like they're not awake,
I'm awake.
like I'm awake, you know. But I don't think people listening will mind too much, because we all have probably a pretty there's a lot of we observe a lot of NPCs out there, and we probably wish there's a little bit more thoughtfulness injected into everything. But you know, that aspect of like, what I'm trying to say is people create this for themselves, right? Like the world we see is just a product of all of our thoughts and the actions that they inspire, right? And so of course, I think people at the helm of large organizations and with a lot of power, they collude and organize and act in their own best interests, just as, you know, people in much smaller organizations do. You know, that's what we do. We try to improve our situation, and we use the tools and influence available to of doing so. And you know, so when it comes to, you know, the banking cabal and the you know, the government and the pharmaceutical and all that kind of stuff, and the WEF people, like, again, I'm sure there's collusion, but I actually think I think most of them think they're doing good. And I think their ego causes them to think that. I think like they think they know what's best for the world, and therefore they're justified in imposing it. We won't use that language, but you know.
Well, I mean, I think you're justified in using that kind
Right.
of
But like coaxing or inspiring people to see the legitimacy of our solutions,
incentivization,
sort of thing, you know.
right? It's a perverted incentivization model.
Yeah. But again, like I think Bitcoin is tremendously important for this, because, you know, I've always felt this way. But the question for me was like, well, yeah, but so, okay, it's not the big dark cabal you have to fight. It's the people you have to engage and get them to change. But how do you do that? You know, short of shoving 10 grams of mushrooms down every living soul's, you know, mouth, you know.
Yeah.
And that's not practical. So, you know, that was always one of the stumbling blocks for me. And I'm part of the reason why I'm basically all I do is Bitcoin stuff now, is because I see that as the proper incentive to bring people in, and to, of course, not immediately, but to get them to receive different value signals and respond to them on a more fair, more truthful basis. And that alone, over the course of time, that just more truthful feedback will grind away at the composite that they've constructed based on corruption and falsity and distortion. And I think, you know, then you'll just have those moments where people, you know, more and more just kind of click, and they have that moment where things don't really jive anymore. And that's the splinter in their mind that causes them to go down the rabbit hole, so as it were, and try to go on that hero's journey, or recapitulate or reconstruct their perspective. And, you know, the other thing about the WEF people, and like, I'm not discrediting all the, like, I know the young, whatever they're called, the leaders are in the cabinets of all the countries, governments, and, you know, the tentacles are everywhere. But I'm so not like impressed or afraid or like with these people. Like, and I think we give them too much power by blaming everything on them, and by always pointing out like everything that they do. I don't care what they do, you know, like, and if it's your thing to be that way inclined to shed light on it, like I do think it's good that certain things are brought to light, and we know that these people are in the cabinets of everywhere. So I'm not saying like completely ignore, but I guess all I'm saying is I think we sometimes focus too much on just like trying to pinpoint who the bad guy is and all the different ways they're working, instead of just being like, you're a pathetic piece of shit, you know, for basically being bad, or at least not being aware of how your well-intended actions are exerting so much, you know, pain and suffering on people. And I would rather just focus on the things and the people that are attempting to alleviate that are attempting to do things the right way. And again, you have this faith, like, you know, it might be one of the most paramount faiths, but like, if you're if you truly believe in the kind of redemptive power of truth and freedom, then you have to believe that if you put all your energy behind that, the more people that do it, that will resolve through the course of time. And who the hell knows how, how long that will be, or rather it would be an ongoing process forever, but hopefully tilting more in favor of truth and freedom. And that's like, what more could you hope for? And what would be a better strategy? So yeah, the WEF people they don't take much of my mental space up, because I find them so pathetic, kind of, basically.
It's one of those things where I keep up with it because there's this transitionary period. I mean, probably the two of us have been going through it for a long time, and one of the things that I see with Bitcoiners or libertarians that is done very poorly is this aspect of empathy. Is all right. How do we take the guys that are normies, right? Who they are. You're your friends, maybe your parents, maybe whoever they are, and you're trying not to be that asshole that's like, hey, like, this is why it's all
You're a
fucked up.
fucking normie.
Right. That is not a good sales pitch.
Yeah.
And so to empathize with people and meet them where they're at and identify the problems that they're concerned about, and then help provide the solution is one of the areas I work. And like, to your point, I don't think a lot of people are actually really bad people. I think there's a gross and backwards incentive structure
Right.
that is very powerful, that people are persuaded by. There's a lot of glitz and glam and all this fame and fortune that comes along with taking what I believe is the ultimately the bankers point of view in terms of what their agenda might be. And so when I see this with WEF, I'm always reminded of Carlin, when Carlin would say, he was on a panel one time and he started saying something, and this guy next to him said, this is a conspiracy. And Carlin just shot back very, very matter of factly, is you don't need a conspiracy where interests overlap. So when you have interest overlap between banks and tycoons and church and the politicians, and that you have interest overlapping on extremely high levels with lots and lots and lots of money behind it, and in total, and at the end of the day, I think what we're looking at now is this idea that you've got this net zero, and all of the ESG crap that's going on out there. And I think that's partly due because I was talking about it earlier today. We've gotten to the point where a lot of the nations, like the BRICS nations, aren't going to be accepting this fiat anymore. And a lot of the BRICS nations are the guys that have a bunch of the carbon types of fuels, whether it's petroleum or gasoline. And so now what do you have? What are you left with? If they're not going to take a lot more fiat, or if they're taking, more fiat for less product, what you have is an energy supply problem. You have an energy shortage. And a lot of the nations that are fiat nations, whether it's the US, UK, the EU, in terms of country or, combined countries. And so what are they looking to do in all of this is reduce the blowback. If you're trying to reduce the blowback and you understand like where, all of this is coming from, you understand why guys like Al Gore or Greta Thunberg or anybody else is, an ESG pimp out there is relevant, not only relevant, but held up on a pedestal the way they are, is because these guys are shilling for this malincentive but that's being put forth by the banks. And I mean, once you start to see all of this, and the only, I think the only reason to understand, the only way to really understand this is from kind of this Austrian Bitcoin point of view, where if you understand there's a alternative to what's going on, and that we should be using power, and maybe we should be using more power, and that maybe this isn't really why they're pushing this as, it's bad for you, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the earth. Maybe it's really just to cover their ass so that when this whole system comes apart and there's, no fuel, no carbon, or carbon based fuels, that they were to blame for it all. And I think that's really kind of where you get to with a lot of the problems that we're seeing today, is the more that they can control the narrative, the situation, the headlines, and all the glitz and glamour from celebrity coming out there. I think that's what you get to, but to show people there is an out, there is an alternative, there is this amazing technology now that's going to free humanity over the course of our lifetimes. I think that is the piece where you can transition them to go, huh? And that's a seed. It's a seed.
Mhm.
That's all you can do. You're not going to force it. Like, nobody's going to become a Bitcoiner overnight. They're
Yeah.
definitely not going to become like an Austrian, overnight. Like, that's just not how any of that works. It didn't work that way for me. Didn't work that way for anybody who read more than 2 books. Like, it's one of those things where you got to plant a seed, and that empathy to just give that scratch that they go back and go, yeah, maybe I should learn a little bit more about that. Maybe I should pick up that book that he gave me. Whatever. It does really help, to bring people along to, maybe a new beginning.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And my approach and what I often say is like very few people are receptive to, you know, the bad guys rule the world argument, whether it's the WEF or the banking guys or whomever. And most so-called normal people don't even want to hear about, any corruption anywhere, because, obviously that's an uncomfortable feeling to admit that to yourself, that like, oh, first of all, you didn't know how fucked up things were. And second of all, they're so fucked up. Like how much does that shake your worldview? Like really? But what everybody wants is just a better life, more opportunity, more love, more joy, more happiness, more abundance, all those kind of things. And if we're right about Bitcoin, more freedom, that's what it provides, right? It's just a better means of interacting amongst ourselves and transmitting, storing, expressing value between us and all the benefits that accrue from that. And so, in my opinion, the thing to do, and again, to each their own, but my approach is to just lean into like the how this can improve your life. We were saying before about getting to that neutral point, cognitively, let's say, and how the psychedelic experience is a part of that, and your diet and your routine and fitness and all that stuff. But Bitcoin was that piece that seemed to bring the clarity on the world. Like you may have been seeing how things work, but it's so complex and it's so convoluted, and as you say, it's structured on such perverse and false and unfair incentives that it's hard to get a grasp for how all that works. But I think what a lot of people in Bitcoin recognize is when you put on the orange lenses, right? When you put on that orange Bitcoin filter and then look out on the world and kind of graph that onto the world, then it starts to make a lot of sense. You can see where things have gone astray. You can see the right way that they're supposed to be structured. And amongst other things, that just gives you, one, a confidence that now you can engage the world more capably, and two, that you can do so on terms that like you can really be convicted in. This is how it's supposed to be. This is the degree of honesty. This is the degree of truth. This is the degree of freedom that is optimal for human beings to interact in the world. And again, if we can do that and invite all the good that acting in that way, or invite all the good that acting in that way makes available to us, then people in your life are going to be the ones being like, bro, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing for all those things? Tell me about the psilocybin once a year. Tell me about your diet. Tell me about this Bitcoin thing, because people love to buy and they hate to be sold. Right. And so that conspiracy corrupt pitch is very uncomfortable and people resist it. But
Yeah.
but just seeing that people are living a healthy, well-balanced and hopeful or optimistic life, everybody wants that. And I think slowly but surely, as the Bitcoin demographic and the parallel economy that everyone's engaging in grows, that'll just become more and more apparent with every
Yeah.
day, every month, every year, until it's inarguable. People are like, do you want to stay in this, shitty fiat land? Or do you want to come over here in Orange Land? And people are going to be like, I want to go over there in Orange Land. It looks way fucking better over there. And then we'll be like, come on in. The door's open.
Yeah. It's so easy. I know. And that's, I mean, when you get into that paradigm where it kind of just shows everybody, that's the one thing, like, from the whole psilocybin experience I took, right? It's like, you can't take the experience to anybody else.
Right.
But what is resounding about it is, if you're asking during these experiences, what do I take? What do I take to show the world about this? One thing you take is love. That's it.
Mm, mm,
And if you could codify, if you could literally codify love, Bitcoin would be it. Why? Because peace and consent is the minimum amount of love you have to show a stranger on this planet. That's it. Just peace and consent. You don't have to give them anything. You can't take anything from them. You can leave them alone. They can leave you alone. On the other hand, is force and coercion, right? Like that's CBDCs, that's fiat, that's everything else. If you can take that one little piece and say, will you love your fellow human being enough to leave them alone? Then you've got it. That's it. And that is
mm.
where Bitcoin comes in. It's literally codified. You can't take people's stuff. You got to leave people alone unless you come to them with a proposal that makes sense to them. Where you're going to have to come to them from a logical, reasonable standpoint, whether it's barter or trade, services or products. That one piece of code for the entire human race, where you get to go, yeah, you know what? We have cracked the code on what we should be doing in terms of transactions, and that's love. That's
Yeah.
peace and consent, and the only thing that does that forever right now is Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And interestingly, I think the element of it where it can only be obtained through convincing someone to voluntarily give it to you, that's kind
Mhm.
of like the individualism aspect of Bitcoin. Like you have to make a case for me to give you something of value for something that you give me a value. But I think, the metaphor, if we want to call it that, works in another way. And I think it's because it treats everyone the same, and
Yeah.
because it connects everyone on the same basis. Maybe I'm taking a little bit of license here, but I think it also conveys the metaphor extends to unconditional union, let's say, because
Mhm.
everyone is connected in the same way with everybody else without condition. And I think that's kind of another hallmark of the psychedelic experience, because one of the things is often reported is this sense of unconditional union or love with everything, basically. um and so I think, interestingly, as you say, I mean, Bitcoin is kind of the manifestation of, if not that experience, many of the principles tend that tend to come up in that experience, manifested in the world in a manner in which we can engage with other people in, and importantly, verify that they're engaging in the same way. And if we all make those mutual agreements, then what opens up is basically, well, yeah, is a system for interacting with one another that acts as though love is the fundamental motivating principle or something, or operating principle, something
It's
like
it
that.
it's funny when you're talking earlier is where you take this kind of like this warrior type of mindset and the hippy dippy, and you were spot on when you were saying that is one of the culminating parts of a lot of times when we're out here on this brave mission is, if these guys, they come out and we start discussing this and what they're going to be able to take away from it, and maybe have never been talked to about Bitcoin at all, right? And as they're going through and shedding their past life, or what they consider their transgressions, and now for the first time they're being introduced to a new code, right? Like, scrap that old corrupted code bullshit that you went through, forgive yourself, and then plug this in, right? Like, this is where it is. And you start to see a lot of times, because this is obviously an ongoing project. I mean, it's a lifelong commitment, right? Is like, you want to come do this, well, guess what, I'm probably gonna pester you for the rest of your life to see how you're doing. And as they go through and they begin to see the broader picture, is if you introduce them to this new code, and they really gravitate towards it because the old code was so corrupted, and they just see it at that fundamental level. Boy, you want to talk about evangelists for the right cause, the right go not only go out and do this, but like become another leader. Go out and do what I do. Go out and do this all over the place. And so that's one of the final things that we kind of get to in this whole process out here is, hey, I don't know what your passion is, but maybe this will help you find your passion. Maybe
Yeah,
plug this new code in and find something new.
Totally. Maybe it's a good time to kind of explain a bit more about what it is you do, because I don't even really know.
Yeah. So Brave is a post-traumatic stress mission that I started out here in North Georgia. And you know, the whole the whole thing kind of came to me because one of my good friends from jujitsu, we were off on the side talking and all this kind of stuff. And he's a shaman. And, this guy is just salt of the earth, great guy. And came up and we were talking and he's like, he's like, you ever fuck with fungus? I was like, mushrooms? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, and he, in a very, like brotherly type of way, a guy you've gone a couple rounds with who's beat your ass and everything else.
Right.
And, not to make light of it in any sense of the situation. We're not going out to the club or any of that kind of bullshit.
Right.
And I said, man, no, I've never done mushrooms in my life. And it's something that I've actually warmed up to over the years. And he goes,
when was this?
Oh, this is years ago. It's probably 2019, early 2020 before things got weird.
Oh,
and,
so relatively new, kind of.
Yeah, I was so straight laced growing up, and you grow up here in the deep South, and you're not only told about the war on drugs and everything, but like the whole Southern Baptist religion down here is you're going to hell if you ever do anything like this. Right. So when we finally got to the point where the time was right, went out and he introduced me to a hero's dose. I had done a lot of experimenting with high amounts of THC, like ingestible THC, like 500 milligrams at a time, just trying to get to that point where I did notice over time that as I would experiment with higher doses of THC, that I was breaking through something different, like a very psychedelic experience versus just giggles, feeling good, sleep, all that kind of stuff.
You ever done it in a float tank? An edible, weed edible in a float tank?
I have. Yeah.
That's an interesting experience.
Yeah, for somebody who doesn't like to be hot or closed in, it's kind of the opposite of. I mean, it's a little more harsh for me. Like I like going out here. The backyard is a mountain, right? Like I've got.
Oh yeah, me too. But I had to give it a whirl, and yeah, I've never done psilocybin or anything in a float tank, but I've done high dose THC, and it's a trip.
Yeah, it is definitely a trip. I wouldn't recommend it. If it's something you want to do, then by all means. But yeah, we went out on the mountain. I think it was actually Good Friday, which was really kind of serendipitous, right? Because I grew up as a Christian and all these other things, and I've got my shaman who is who's I guess Puerto Rican via Egypt, right? And so he's
interesting.
He's definitely a different guy. And so as we're sitting out there, having this initial trip, you start to come back out, kind of like what I call phase 2, right? Is you've gone through your hour and a half, 2 hours worth of trip. And this is early in the morning. This is kind of our practice, right? You go out before the sun rises, so it's still black. And you really get to have a really powerful experience. And then as the world starts to wake up, you kind of come out of this and you're kind of reborn to a degree. And it was cold. It was like 30 something degrees. We had all the proper outdoor gear and all that fun stuff. And we're well prepared in terms of being outdoorsmen. But that was something that changed my life forever. Right. So I was like, we have to replicate this. There are other things that we have to do. And he being a shaman and saying, yeah, this is what it's all about. This is about finding the people who are receptive and then making them fellow travelers. And he hadn't messed with Bitcoin at all, right? So this wasn't one of those things, and I was just freshly into it. So over the years, we would meet out here and we'd go out and we'd have a trip and we'd talk some more and we'd have experiences, and that would get more intense. We would be more intent, but we would also go for larger trips and things. And as we were finding out about what was going on here, we were also finding out about the land we were in. This amazing piece of history right in my backyard. It's like an ancient Cherokee, and probably even more ancient than the Cherokee Indians. There's bent trees all over the place. There's giant granitic boulders on top of Talladega ridges where they should not be. And so we're finding like all of these really interesting places out here. And I was like, God, we've got to get our shit together, and we have got to show people what this is about. And then, really talk to him. And at the time, I, was talking to him about Bitcoin, and we were kind of overlapping his knowledge of, being a shaman, and mine about Bitcoin and, economics and all these things. And as it all kind of came together, there was that, the epiphany. And so with that, I started B.R.A.V.E and have been taking guys out and having these experiences, introducing them to Bitcoin at the, towards the tail end of everything, is in so that they kind of see the full circle piece of this. And, to see guys, and get texts and, messages or calls from the guys that will come out here and do these, like, hey brother, peace, I love you, how are you doing? Like, it's just this foundation of super solid guys that have had their life changed, and now we're on a new path. Like that's what B.R.A.V.E is. And so, the goal is over time to not only have that here, but to take that around, hopefully the world, but definitely the United States, and start, telling stories and showing people and doing this evangelism that's not just psilocybin, but it's a new way for us to, to put into a code how we're supposed to treat each other, which I think, in the big scheme of things, when I, kind of made the mention of, Good Friday, like Good Friday is the celebration of, Christ rising and all those things, where, I'm not very religious, but I am extremely, I don't know, faith driven, I guess, in a very mystical sort of way. Like I definitely believe in the higher power. But to share this understanding, at least where you go, hey, like I see these other people out here, I see the struggle, and if we can help them out, if we can help them through the traumatic experiences of their, their former self and their old life, and that's what good enough for me. That's what we're doing.
Right. And are these like one-on-one, or do you go out with a group?
So far it's been it's mostly been a one-on-one, so a very tailored type of,
And a lot of vets?
a lot of vets, and some Bitcoiners, and that's the thing, is some vet Bitcoiners as well. That, where you start to see, how how are you going to make this work?
Mm.
And the way you make this work is, it's not just going to be the vets. It's going to be, this people in this space that see what you're doing, that are going to be behind what you're doing, and then, obviously, put value behind it. And so when you can perpetuate this, and you can, get one of these, microphones and a camera, and then start, going around and you see it. I mean, that's the thing, is once you know who you're looking for, it just pops out. It's like the damn Matrix, right? You can go agent, agent, agent. There's a good one, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of in that vein, but like, the people that you want to come out here, and to it, from that side. And so, and I know, God, the amount of vets I just know from, being a vet, it's just like that guy, not that guy. Bring the guys out here that are going to do real good in the world, that don't have the capacity to do, the bad things, right? Like that's the thing. You don't bring the shady grifter types. You bring out the people who are, really, really solid.
Yeah. Man, what have the last 2 years, or maybe the better way to ask it is, what was your perspective like, pre 2019, 2020? Because it seems like both Bitcoin and the psychedelics have, created a fairly substantial shift in your perspective, at least on certain things, in the last 2 years. And then, of course, amongst that, we had all the COVID bullshit, and yeah, and the all the other bullshit that came along with that,
Yeah.
which has caused a lot of change in people. So like, where were you at 3 years ago? And how much has all this changed you?
So I got a vehicle, man. That was the best part. I got an upgrade. I had this lofty idea of libertarianism, based in
Right.
Austrian economics, and so I wasn't, a foreigner to the idea of, long time horizons, or delayed gratification, or just this idea that we had to switch from a fiat debt type of fractional reserve banking type of culture into one of savings. But there was no vehicle. right? Like you're sitting here, you're fighting a system where you want freedom, where you want people to do amazing things and realize their passion. But what you're dealing with is the tiny little party that will never have incentive to will never incentivize people with lots of money and lots of power, the banks, the tycoons, the other politicians. Like they don't want anything to deal with that. They don't want nothing to do with it. So there's no incentive to be part of the smaller third party. There's none. There's a lot of principle in it, and so the ideas were there. The problem is we didn't have a vehicle. So when we found the vehicle, it was just like, man, what an epiphany. It was just like, guys, I don't know what you're doing in politics, and I understand that there's a soapbox for you to stand on, but at the same time, if you're standing on that soapbox, you should be probably presenting a real solution and giving these guys a vehicle to get to where we want to be as as people who want to set the human race free. And so for me, man, it was just one of those things where you're like, yeah, if you're walking, let's say you're walking from San Diego to DC, you're using those black Cadillacs to walk along through the mountains, and all of a sudden, you get to maybe Arizona where you're frying to death, and nothing's going to go your way, and you're probably going to die. And here comes this like supercharged whatever your dream vehicle is. Hey, hey, loser, get inside, right? And now you're just on a mission. You're in this air conditioning. You're moving along. You've got a real opportunity to see this thing through and get it to where you want to be. So I think that was the biggest change. And I'd had revelations before that where the whole drugs are bad thing, and then all that nonsense in the past, where that kind of got a second look, especially after coming back and trying it. When I finally was out, I think I was in Colorado snowboarding or something, and weed was, you walk in, you buy it, and I was like, wow, nobody's dying. And the guy, the bud tender behind the bar, said something like, hey man, if you're looking for a good head high or something like that, try this Asian blonde. And I just laughed, and I was like, sure, why not? And yeah, we went back to the cabin, had a good smoke, and I was like, what in the world are they
I've been
talking
lied
about?
to.
Yeah, so it's all fucking light. And I think at that point it's just, all right, if they're lying about even this kind of stuff, why are they lying about this kind of stuff? And I mean, there's a great book by Brian Muraski. It's The Immortality Key, or The Key to Immortality, either
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Uh,
I read it.
Boy, what a fantastic read. And you start to see kind of the church's involvement in some of the stuff. Um, and you're just like, all right, everything that they've ever taught me is at least to be questioned. I say bullshit, but that's being maybe a little hyperbolic, because a lot of what they give you is about 90 something percent truth, and then they twist
Right.
it
Needs some
very
more scrutiny, right? You're not gonna maybe ditch it yet, but a little bit of a closer look.
I actually kind of believe them that meth is bad and don't do crack and stuff. Like the mushrooms and the psilocybin. I don't know. I think it's all right.
It's funny. I've been asked many times, like what as we all are, what our Bitcoin rabbit hole journeys are. And I think my most common answer was trying to buy DMT, came across the Silk Road, and they were only using Bitcoin. And so like, that's the first time I'd heard about it. A friend of mine and I, anyways, we didn't do it. We pussed out. We didn't want to have DMT delivered to wherever. This was like 2000, I don't know when it was, 11, 12, 13, one of those. But then as I've been thinking about it more recently, and because you also, especially in light of the last 2 years, you ask yourself, like, when did you realize it was all bullshit? Because a lot of people had a waking up moment of the last 2 years, but a lot of us also, like, as soon as this started kicking off, we were like, oh, this is going to be completely insane. Like, they're going to do everything wrong. Everything's going to be trampled on. This is just how the system responds to these things. And I was, so I was trying to track it back, and the response I usually gave was just always been a curious person, big reader from a young age, and ended up wondering about the world. And you investigate how everything works long enough, and you kind of come to the impression that it doesn't work super well, or there's lots of issues. But I think, like, the more precise answer would be, and I bring it up because you kind of jog my memory here. When I started smoking weed super young, probably too young. It was like, I think I smoked my first joint at 14, maybe something like that. And, I was always a responsible smoker for what it's worth. Like I'd get my workout done, I'd get my homework done, and I'd be all ritualistic about it. I get my favorite foods together. And, like when it was time to just relax and enjoy and all the hard work was done, I just amplify it with some weed, and I didn't see much of a problem with it. But it was the fact that I had realized at such a young age that this thing was not what everyone was saying about it. They're saying it's all like an addictive, dangerous drug, all this kind of stuff. I was like, what? Like this thing just makes food taste better, and I laugh a lot and I get a good sleep. Like what? I don't understand why, like this is just crazy to me. And that the disparity of what was being said about it and what the reality was just caused me to like that much more question that much more everything else. And if I even look more specifically at it, I was, as a result of my interest in weed, I knew this guy, Mark Emery, the so-called Prince of Pot in Canada, who who was extradited to the US for having sold, he had a seed business, right? So he was selling, and he was, I think, number 5 on the most wanted list in the US because he was selling cannabis seeds. And the Canadian government acquiesced to the extradition request. And so he went to the US and he did, I can't remember now, 5, 7, something like that in prison. But when he was trying to fight it, he had a Ron Paul t-shirt on one time. And I was watching him on, like, whatever argument he was making why he shouldn't be extradited, which obviously I agreed with, but he had a Ron Paul shirt on. And so then I was like, oh, who's this Ron Paul guy? And why is he on this guy's t-shirt? I go into Ron Paul, start learning about the Federal Reserve and all that kind of stuff. So I think the most accurate response to, the beginning of my Bitcoin rabbit hole story was smoking pot, at a young age, and having that be the thing that, put me on the path and caused me to ask the questions that made Bitcoin even relevant,
Yeah, that was high gear for me. I mean, I was questioning. I found it was John Taylor Gatto, then Ron Paul, a lot of reading in between there. And then, man, I think I had found the Anti-Federalists and Lysander Spooner, who are all like, fuck this whole thing is stupid. The centralization effort is the dumbest damn thing ever. I didn't sign any contract. I'm not part of this bullshit. Like your magic letters on a piece of parchment have nothing to do with me. And that was right around 2015. That's when I, really found pot, and I was just like, yeah, I'm with these guys now. Yeah, Ron Paul did it for a lot of guys, man.
Yeah, definitely.
As a doctor who was like, yeah, what are we doing locking up guys like, Ross Ulbricht and Jesus Christ, like you go down that whole thing, but like
I love that meme where it's Master Splinter with the 4 Ninja Turtles, and Master Splinter's Ron Paul and the Bitcoiners are the Ninja Turtles. It's perfect. But when typically, or not typically, but I think it's fairly common that when people have those experiences, they think more about withdrawing from it all than leaning into it. And you recently made a bid in the gubernatorial race in Georgia, right?
Yeah.
And so I watched some of the debates. Love to see, some of these ideas and perspectives that you articulated getting airtime. I can only imagine how it bounced off the brains of most of the people listening. But, tell me about why you decided to, get involved in all that stuff.
Yeah, and it was actually the catalyst. The whole Joe Rogan bit where he talks about, the girl going home getting high and her dog talks to her and like all that bullshit. Like you don't do anything anymore. And I'm like, man,
Right.
like when I started doing this, I started keeping a notebook, right? Like I would just write down everything that I was doing and wanted to do, and like just putting things into fruition at that point. And I was pissed, like I was a vet. I was pissed. We weren't freer, like nothing, none of that kind of stuff mattered. And I was like, I feel like I've got a responsibility at this point, right? It's like there's something in my DNA. It's like you're kind of a fighter archetype, right? And so you've got some things to do. you've got to go out and you've got to make sure that other young guys aren't taken advantage of the way you were taken advantage of. If you can help that, then do it. Like Ron, I love Ron to death, but Ron, by the time 2008 rolled around, he was kind of a little guy in a suit that, a lot of people just didn't get, especially the tough guys, right? The fighters, like, yeah, maybe he's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, maybe I can give this a voice a little bit. So it was 2016 that I made the decision that I was going to run for U.S. Congress. That would culminated in a 2018 run as a Republican. I was a Libertarian running as a Republican in the Georgia 7th District, and I lost that. Then in 2020, I ran again as for U.S. Senate, and I sent the whole thing into a runoff. And then obviously 2022 did a bid for the governor. And that's the thing is, it didn't make me lazy. It actually like got me off my ass, gave me this understanding, like, dude, these guys aren't smart. Like, these guys don't have the answers. And if you ever get in front of a crowd with them, and you're going to land haymakers that make them look really, really dumb. And that's kind of just what I found through, the past, the 3 elections that I was in, is like, when you actually get in person with these guys, they're not real bright. They're kind of bought and paid for. They're kind of policy wonks. They think that they can do stuff inside the system and get stuff done. And yeah, the impetus behind this was not winning it. It was, let's introduce people to an idea, and that way you can actually use a platform that has a little bit of spotlight. And so my messaging and everything else rang very very true, I guess, with the Libertarians. Found some success there, and found a lot of support amongst that group of people. And then obviously in later 2021, I guess, is kind of when I found a good amount of support from the Bitcoin community. And it was just, it's a beautiful thing to stand in defiance of these monsters and introduce people who would have never known otherwise. Whether it's a live debate, whether you're getting some crossover in terms of appearances for like a campaign trail where the local Republicans are tired of the establishment and they want to hear something new, to be able to do that. Or even the Democrats, you get invited down to, like, downtown Atlanta to talk about cannabis or psilocybin legalization. And it's that was the whole goal going in. It's like, man, didn't have any grandeur of actually winning a seat. There's absolutely there's no way the system's actually going to do that. There's a great saying out there that if voting actually mattered, they wouldn't let you do it. And to go out there and push for not only freedom, but to show people, like, there's something more to this. There is an actual vehicle that we have now that's the escape hatch for humankind. It's literally weapons grade freedom. We've got the messaging, we've got the brain power, we've got all of these amazing people in the space that are young, that see through this. And that's the thing is, you look at who the current establishment is. I mean, a lot of them are 70s, 80 years old. They've been there forever. This country, the people that actually fought the crown, were older teenagers, younger 20s, maybe early 30s. And that's what I see in Bitcoin, is I see revolutionaries. And they like the idea that this old guard is going to be able to keep up with this young, energetic, thoughtful, not only digital age type of generation, but we're talking about now ultra high digital, right? Like this, we are in a new paradigm, and that paradigm of newness is speeding up. So as my kids come of age and their kids, this old guard and I think the way of thinking and culture, I think it's going to die naturally. Thank God. But that was, I guess, more or less the impetus of, like, why go do this? Well, for one, your kids get to see you stand in the face of in the face of failure, no matter what it is, and take the loss, and still not see it as a loss. See it as something that you've done what you've come here to accomplish. And sometimes it takes standing in the face of certain failure to send a message. And I think at the end of the day, I think we did some pretty good things, and I hope more so that we've inspired a lot of other people to do the same.
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with your point um, about the Bitcoiners broadly speaking. And this is kind of where the comment I made earlier about not caring about like the whole WEF thing comes from, because like we are winning so goddamn hard. Like everything is there now. And the change, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but like there's so much momentum behind it. And of course there would be, right? Like these eternal values and principles of
Mhm.
freedom and truth and
Just
peace.
economics.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's like, that's one of the hallmarks of truth. Like there's no negotiating with it. It just is. And I think that's what we're contending with now. And the fact that that's on our side of the divide, if is tremendously powerful. And we just need to continue to lean into that and continue to build and continue to amplify that, and everything else will take care of itself. I mean, the old thing will atrophy, the people will die off, minds will change, all that kind of stuff. But I did want to ask you, like, as you're going, you're doing these debates, you're speaking with so many people on the campaign trail, you're interacting with media, you're getting some exposure, I presume, to like the political system, the different components of it.
Mhm.
What is your impression like when you're espousing your ideas, your beliefs, you're talking to these people? Like, what is the kind of feedback you get? Because you correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw the results, and like Abrams and Kemp,
Yeah.
right? Like it was basically between them, and you had a sliver of the vote. And I'm just saying that because like clearly people thought it was between two people, and it was great that you were there introducing some different perspectives on the stage. But again, like back to this notion of people being at fault for constructing what we have because they continue to feed into it by making choices that perpetuate it, that
Yeah.
don't, and because they don't see there's as much wrong with it as you or I might. And so just I'd love to get some insight into your impression of how your messaging was landing or not with the people that you were engaging with as part of that campaign.
Yeah, you know, I guess comparatively, if you go up against the Republicans and Democrats, you compare it to what they're going to get is like, man, some people would just call it a day, but you'd be surprised when especially the very high profile debate. You get one debate with these guys, and after that, oh my god, like things just were, the amount of messaging that was coming in the door, the telephone calls, the request for some interviews and all that. I mean, it exploded to the point where not only did I have obviously libertarians were fanatic about it. They were like, this is the gold standard. This has to be what we are shooting for every time we have somebody in a race. And that was it was great to hear, but that's your echo chamber, right?
Yeah.
Is like to your point is like what is coming in from Democrats, from Republicans, from independents, and what we got out of that was by far, I mean, well worth our time and effort, because there are a lot of people who are like, I can't do it. That for the first time, you've convinced me that I would rather vote for somebody who will lose than cast my vote for a winner. Because with a winner, we're going to get the same, we're going to get tyranny. We might get a different brand or a different flavor of tyranny, but we're still going to get tyranny. And I can't support that anymore. And during my time on the campaign trail, you try to just, hey, listen, at the end of the day, if anything helps you out and helps you divorce yourself from the system, like this is the exit. This is we're here, we're using this platform, but what we're proposing is not this system, not a reformation of the system. What we're talking about is a decentralization and an exit from the system. So when people hear that, and then you say, and you don't have to defend a politician for whatever the next 2 or the next 4 years, like their eyes kind of start to light up and you start to see a smile creep across their face, and they're like, oh, I've never really considered that I never have to defend these fuckers anymore, right? It's like when you get people that just have that thought, like, I don't have to defend Stacey Abrams, I don't have to defend Brian Kemp, like I don't have to defend any of these people, and the thing is like what this guy said is actually pretty legit. Like he's saying, like, we're never going to change the system from the inside. We're never going to be able to do that. But there is this other system that you can go participate in, much like the whole John Galt and Atlas Shrugged moment, where you can say, hey, listen, I'm taking my value, I'm taking my money, I'm taking my life, and this is where I'm headed with it. And if you live it by example, and a lot of times, with my podcast, I get to talk about what we do out here. Like, this is homesteading, this is homeschooling, this is being independent, making your own food, trying to make sure that you use as little energy as possible, at the same time while living in balance with nature. And so, uh, yeah, I mean, numbers. Yeah, I guess numbers in a rigged voting system are one of those things where you go, yeah, maybe that's all we got. Maybe we didn't inspire anything. Maybe we inspired people to stay home. I have no idea. I can
Mm.
tell you what was crazy is from the 2020 election for Senate versus the 2022 election, where notoriety, name, and all that kind of stuff, like name recognition, was way higher in 2022. We got, I think it was 115,000 votes in 2020, which, not terrible for a libertarian. But then to turn around and have it go, down to, I think it was like 27,000. It was crazy. I was the worst performing libertarian on the entire Georgia slate, like the worst. And I was like, huh, that's really interesting. And not only was I the worst, like we went in and actually like broke down like how bad it was. I garnered half as much as the next person who was on the libertarian slate. It was a factor of two, minimum a factor of two, where when you looked at all the other comparisons with Republicans and Democrats, like who did what and where, then it only looks like people who were like, oh yeah, this whole thing's rigged, were like 100% right. So like there's
You're talking
statistics.
about that's the case for this most recent one?
Yeah, that's the that's the case for the 2022 election. So when you see everything and you do this, like the statistical breakdown, you're like, this looks pretty ugly, like really bad for Georgia.
Have you, I mean, 'cause the libertarians have gotten kind of a bad rap. I mean, just because,
We don't help ourselves, man. I'm
right, right.
sorry.
And never winning is never good either, right?
Right.
Um, and it's been, my experience has been like less when I encounter libertarians, like card carrying libertarians. I'm often surprised at the percentage that are either not like educated on or supportive of Bitcoin. Like there's a lot of gold bugs, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm it's just like it's such a layup, and it's weird that it's not more
So,
commonly supported. What's your take on that?
yeah, I've tried to figure this out, and it's funny to me. Is like I've gotten to the point where I know the inner workings of the Libertarian Party, and I don't know if your audience knows or cares or any of that kind of stuff. But the Libertarian Party was taken over last year by the Mises Caucus, and the
Yeah,
Mises Caucus are a bunch of Ron Paulers. They are not the very tiptoe through the tulips.
they're way more spicy. It's fun to
Oh,
watch.
it's a lot more fun, right? It's like, and that's the only thing you can do is the only thing you can do is buck the system so hard while keeping truth at the center of it, that you outrage enough people into that knee jerk reaction to where now the media has to cover it.
Right,
And
right, right.
like, it's a technique, right? Like, is it right or wrong? I don't know, but I can tell you by the numbers, it's working. And are they ever going to win a national election? No. And I don't think that's actually the intent, but it does appear that way. So, in terms of now understanding, like, why aren't more people in the libertarian circles? Why aren't they Bitcoiners? The only thing I can tell you is I don't think most people have studied the economics. There are a bunch of good people in the Libertarian Party who understand economics who have not studied Bitcoin. And it's one of those things. It's 10,000 hours, right, to become an expert on Bitcoin, to be able to evangelize it, to be able to talk about it, and the different sectors, whether it's culture, whether it's finance, whether it's business, whatever you're looking at. I don't think most people have put in the time to do such a thing. And I mean, and even like that's out of the few people that have become Austrians in terms of their reading and be able to explain, business cycle and all that kind of stuff. there are even fewer of those who have done the work in Bitcoin. And so the evangelism, I don't know, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, we're gonna keep doing better, at some point. Like I trust me, I get it. The same question. I've retired from politics for that reason. Is like this Bitcoin path is the path, and like the whole political thing. If you're using it as a soapbox, I understand, to show people that there's an out, to educate people, to give some people, some ideas to go and do their homework on. But outside of that, winning, like I have no delusions of grandeur. There's ever going to be like a Dave Smith. Like, don't get me wrong, love Dave Smith, and I hope he does extremely well in 2024 in terms of waking people up using that platform.
What's he
But
running for?
president. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he hasn't announced yet, but yeah, Dave Smith. I mean, you've probably seen him on Joe Rogan. I mean, he was on there, I think, last time, talking about the entire setup for NATO to go to war with Russia. I mean, explained it beautifully. But I mean, he's a comedian. He's a great guy. He's
I know.
super.
I only saw a clip from that show, and they were like, they were basically talking about Bitcoin for 10 minutes without talking about Bitcoin. It made the rounds on Bitcoin Twitter. So I mean, I know he's talked to Guy maybe and a few others, yourself, and
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem like it's center enough in his shtick.
And that's the other thing about politics, right? Is like a lot of times what people are trying to do is craft a message that isn't off-putting, right? And a lot of you just come out and say I'm going to be a Bitcoin president. That's off-put. Like the consensus for the politically dialed in is like, man, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose attention with that kind of stuff. And like that's not what I'm about. I'm not. Listen,
Is
I'm
he
not.
though? He's not going to win anyway. So why not just fucking, like do like you just saying with the Mises Caucus, just be way different and like, why not? He's going to be like a
Yeah.
young,
So
articulate libertarian person, and will that get a few more people interested? Maybe.
if they
But what
ever
if he
come
just
and
went
ask me,
full balls to the wall, orange, like Orange Man,
yeah,
or not
like
Orange Man, Orange Pillar,
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is like that's why I did it for governor. I mean, I hope they will. I hope they'll follow suit. I mean, to their point, like I've got people coming in, like the head of the Mises Caucus, asking me, "Hey, what about like Monero?" And I'm like, "No, Bitcoin, right?" It is like,
The Libertarians love some Monero. They
God
love it.
damn it. I know. It's just like, like, listen, guys, on hash power alone, you're always gonna be second best. Look at this as like TCP IP versus all the other protocols that were there before we actually picked TCP IP. It won out for a reason, right? That's what we're using. That's Bitcoin. It's so far out ahead now. The hash rate it's at such a rate that nothing else is going to debase it. We're done. Like now we're going to work on level 2, level 3, and we're going to scale from there. This idea that you're going to go off and like grab anything else, like it's a work in progress. I'm doing my damnedest to like spread this message. And what's funny is like in my circles, people are extremely receptive to this kind of thing. And I think as time goes on, history looks back, I think we're going to be like some of the first people from the Libertarian Party that were like, yeah, guys, listen, this is your vehicle. You guys wanted a path to quote unquote victory, or do you want a path to legit freedom and independence? And I think that's more or less the selling point.
Yeah. A couple more and then I'll let you go. But one of the things that is obviously a interesting discussion topic, let's say, in Bitcoin is governance, right? Because as you understand more about Bitcoin, you start to ask questions like, well, if the government can't steal from me via inflation, and if they can't steal from me directly, and if I can do jurisdictional arbitrage and all the other stuff, how do they fund themselves? Well,
Bingo.
at a certain point in the future, they can't really, or at least it's greatly reduced. Okay, well, what does governance look like in that type of environment where the government doesn't have an unlimited piggyback by siphoning the wealth of the population? So, and then, people talk about, well, maybe monarchy will make a return, or maybe, a complete, anarcho-capitalist sort of thing. But the way I look at it is, I still, humans are probably still going to want to coordinate in ways outside of the coordination that results from economic best interests, even in a system that's fair and, like a Bitcoin system. So it seems like there'll still be some form of, you know, like human governance, right?
Yeah,
Beyond just
I don't disagree with that at all.
right. And so, and this is highly dependent on what point in time in the future we're considering, because 10 years versus 50 versus 100, the answer will be very different. But just to the extent that you've thought about this issue, what in a hyper Bitcoinized world, that's probably the easiest one to discuss. What do you think will be the nature and shape, look, structure of governance?
Yeah, so I've actually started looking at this in the transitionary period, and I think that's probably the most important for us. As we go from fiat system into Bitcoin system, there's a lot of things that are going to happen, and when we start to see, in the very immediate future, I think too, like possibly 2023, if they're floating around this idea of CBDCs, this is here and now. And I mean, there's pilot programs running in other countries. I think the June 5th deadline by Janet Yellen for McCarthy to either come in and get his omnibus bill and look like a complete schmuck for talking about the idea that they're only going to pass like single line item type of legislation for funding. I think he's going to have to eat crow and come to the table, or he's going to be the guy holding the bag for default when they go to a CBDC. Either way, I think we're going to a quote unquote, the US government and the Fed is going to the CBDC. So when we look at what does that look like for us, right? Like, what does that look like in your town? I think this is going to be different for urban populations versus suburban populations and urban populations. Because where I'm at is extremely urban, it's mountainous and all these kind of things. And I've already started having conversations with my sheriff up here is, hey man, this is what's going to go down. I understand you don't understand economics, but let me explain it to you, right? And he's a nice enough guy. And I think he means very well. But if you're not having this conversation, you're behind the power curve. So the conversation is this: hey man, all of these people from BlackRock and State Street and the rest of these organizations during COVID, especially down here in the South, they came in and they bought property and they bought it at a premium so that they could drive value up as migration came down from the North and from the West Coast. So that when prices, skyrocketed, they started making a mint. Now, people are starting to lose their jobs. We're going to, recession, I think, is already here. I think depression is actually getting very close. And when we understand that these people who have been manipulated for the past, well, let's just say 2 years on its face, like we can sit here and show you this has been done and this has been manipulated. The economy is now going to go to a CBDC. Let me explain how this is going to work for you, Frank. This is going to be, you either go and do their bidding or you don't put food on the table for your kids. You don't get to put clothes on your back. You don't get to do this for all the deputies that you have now. People are going to be pissed with you, Frank. The people that are closest to you during your life, the people that are in your peer group, this community is going to be pissed, because what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to send guys out with shields and badges, and you're going to have to evict people from their homes. You're going to have to absolutely go after people for nonviolent crime that were manipulated by a system. This is being done by the banks. The banks set this whole thing up. They're taking advantage of the situation. They want their property back. They want everything under their control, and they're going to use you at the end of the day to carry out what they want to do through CBDCs. It's like, civil asset forfeiture now. You guys use civil asset forfeiture so that you can increase your coffers, so that you can pay more people, get more equipment, nicer cars, nicer whatever. And at the end of the day, Frank, you're going to have to violate the rights of the people in your community if you go that route. Or we can go this route. We can pay you. We can set up an organization that pays you, where we're either doing it in Bitcoin, whether we're doing it in gold or silver or whatever. But here's the deal, is if we're paying you, these are the requirements of the position, right? It's like, the argument that, what are you going to do for police in a private market? Well, here's the thing is, I'd much prefer to run police competitively in a private market type of style, like everybody's like, well, how do you do this? Well, think about this. Are you happy with your police now? Are you happy with your sheriffs now? Most people are not. Most people have lost all faith in these kind of guys. What if Chick-fil-A ran your police force, right? Do you think that they would be jumping through their ass to make sure that you were happy? Have a great day. It was my pleasure to serve you. Like, that's the alternative. So you have enough interest in a community to scrape together some Bitcoin, some gold, some silver, something of value so that you can start to offer these guys. But here's the condition, right? The condition is this: you're going after violent criminals, and that's it. The people who rape and murder and coerce and steal and vandalize, that's who you go after. If you're going to make peaceful people your target, you're not getting paid anymore, because we get to withhold payment if you're not holding up your terms of service. And this is how you start to perpetuate a Bitcoin type of society. This is completely decentralized, because this is now community dependent, whether it's a city mayor or whether it's your sheriff over a county. This is now how we transition from this fiat god awful system where they take, marching orders from, DC in terms of incentives, or they're taking incentive that comes from you, and they're not having to go out and kick in the doors of peaceful people in their community. Because here's the thing: at the end of the day, if they begin to do that, wearing a uniform, especially here in, Appalachian, is going to get very, very dangerous for these guys. Like, if you're rolling around in a cop car and a badge and everything else, and you start, doing god awful things for CBDCs for the government, if you have a targeted list out there of people that are a problem to the system, at that point, now you're taking a force of maybe, I don't know, a few hundred people, and putting it up against, your, county or city, which is of, vast numbers. This should be a no-brainer for the sheriff at the end of the day. He should be like, all right, how do we start to, roll the system out? What do we need to do in terms of creating a private contract between us and the citizens of this county? And that's the kind of the conversation that we've had. So what do I envision? I envision a more privatized, decentralized sort of, keeping the peace, EMS, things of that nature, which are provided for now. And if we're going to use things like roads, like, everybody's like, well, what about the roads? My roads, right? Like, man, you can pay for the roads you drive on, and you don't have to pay for the roads you don't drive on. Things like that. And not to mention, you've got, the businesses out there like UPS, FedEx, Amazon, who obviously need roads to get you the products that you want to buy and use them for carriers for, not to mention a whole slew of other ones. It's
Yeah.
it's actually a really not so difficult system, especially compared to the one that we're running now.
How does Sheriff Frank respond when you share this sort of a plan with
Well,
him?
so the first time it happened, I think the goo was kind of running out of his ear, right? Like, you can only give somebody so much, and you have to let it kind of marinate for a while. I've been having this conversation with Frank since I moved into this county, right? It was like, hey man, I'm Shane. How are you? Like, walked in,
Here's
came
what's
into
going to happen when government dissolves.
I walked into his office, and we had these conversations about some things. I was like, okay, all right, Frank, I'll see you later. Like, and, right. And, we've run into each other. He knows a lot of my family up here, and I know his family. And it's not that we're completely at odds. And I don't think that you're ever going to win people that way.
Totally.
Um, it's just being that measured, resourceful, forward-looking person, and having that conversation early enough with, now you're building a track record where he goes, huh, yeah, what you did happen. Like, you keep doing that over and over and over again. And at some point he goes, yeah, you know what, maybe this is the best way for us. So I think that's probably where we're headed.
Right. I know libertarians hate the Marodes question. And I understand, like, of course I understand that, people can build private roads and you can have tolls and for who's using them and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But to me, the broader or the larger question is, by whose authority is property assigned and enforced? Let's say outside of Bitcoin. And it would seem, or what is your answer to that question? Like, when you say, well, it's a private road, you put up road, well, who did you buy it from? And now in a legacy system, that's maybe easier to answer, because
Right.
you could say, well, like, it was bought, everything was privatized effectively, and it was bought up before the government dissolved or whatever. But even in things that are novel or new, where there's no legacy, how is authority determined when it's needed in the case of, public use property, or property? Public use property might be a bit of a oxymoron, but property that's going to be used by a lot of people in a complicated way, or you know what I'm trying to say,
Yeah,
right? Like
it's
what happens?
the tragedy. Yeah, tragedy of the commons is kind of where we get to, right? Is, I think everybody knows the tale of the tragedy of the commons is like, if it's everybody's, it's nobody's, and at that point, when it's nobody's, well, then who is responsible? So in a Bitcoin type of, there's some great pieces out there. I think Alex Svetsky did a really good piece in Bitcoin Magazine a few years ago, when he started trying to imagine some of the things you talked about, like the monarchy and possible return to that. But the ability to own property now, right, is like, you don't own property. Nobody owns property. Everybody pays a property tax in the United States, which I think is some of the most un-American stuff to begin with, right? So
Mhm.
when the banks do dissolve and there is no more local bank or central bank or anything like that, as in fiat, and the titles go defunct, and the records are maybe not as well kept, I think what you're going to get down to is some sort of governance at the local level, where this incentive structure is put in place with reinforced incentives, as Bitcoin is, right? So if these people aren't trusted, if they don't have truth on their side, if they don't have their record on their side, and they've abused power, well, that name that you're going to very much depend on here in the very near future, I think, is tarnished. You're not going to be able to be one of those people. You're going to be well known not to be one of those people. People aren't going to procure money out of thin air and put in a malinvestment for malincentive. And so I think what you're going to get down to is some sort of local judicial system where these are hammered out. And it's I guarantee you it's going to be different. And this is not, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned about Bitcoin and Austrianism, like, there's no one size fits all to anything. If a
Mhm.
group of people concur to a set of rules, then those rules could be wildly different. So up here in the mountains, I think if you're on a piece of land and somebody says, I want your house, well, okay, I guess we're either going to figure this out like gentlemen, or we're going to figure this out in some of the worst way possible. And I don't
Mhm.
think that's really something that again, it goes into incentive structure. If you're going to be that person that comes in and tries to settle in some house that somebody's already in, or some property that somebody's already on, that community is not going to want you there. That community is
Yeah.
going to absolutely reject you from the very onset. Because let's say, hey, they take out the chicken farmer on the mountain, right? Like, they take out Shane, and that guy was supplying us with lots and lots and lots of eggs that we couldn't get for a while. Like, no, like, now you've got,
Are
you've
you
just
a
got,
chicken farmer? Is that legit?
we're homesteading. Yeah, we've got a
Oh, yeah.
bunch of
You
chickens
got
out
some
here,
chickens.
and we do supply people with chicken eggs, right? It's like, it's one of those things where when
You
premium
must be
eggs,
rolling in it these days.
oh, bro, it is chicken mafia out here. And great economic lessons for kids is, if you are providing a service to your community, because now in true capitalism, you can provide a service or a product for less money and still cover your costs while making a small profit to reinvest into your business. Then at the same, you've discovered at the heart what a business is. And for us,
Mhm.
to be able to supply a carton of eggs for $5 that are range, like open range type of chickens on some of the best meal possible, and insects and everything else, for that amount of money, when something like that's going for twice that amount at the local grocery store to help people out. Like, that's a really cool thing to be able to do. Like I said, it's positive re-incentive in a good incentive structure, if you're
Totally.
yeah
Totally.
looking at government that way.
I mean, that's the beauty of Bitcoin. The more you look at it, the more you see how a a true, a good master incentive at the center of everything
Yeah.
generates those positive reinforcing incentives down the line. And I think, you know, when I try to answer this question, I think, well, The Sovereign Individual has been a great book for bringing that idea of returns on violence to people. And
Yeah.
and I've always thought, you know, you don't, as you said, you know, you don't own your property. And I would extend that to say, you only own the property that you can defend, or you only the property rights that are unimpeachable are actually, can you assert them, let's say.
Hmm.
And so that's why Bitcoin is the absolute best, because pretty much nobody can violate that property right. But your house, well, the military shows up, it's theirs. It's not really yours. So it's contingent upon how well you're able to uphold those property rights. And indeed, obviously, that has been, at least in part, the role of government, you know, why it was probably instituted in the first place, you know, one of the primary reasons. And then, of course, once you have that power and that wealth that you're protecting, well, you can do lots of other stuff with it. And that in comes the corruption. But when the vast majority of wealth, let's say, is in the domain of unimpeachable property rights,
Hmm.
inviolable property rights, then so much of the incentive outside of that, so much of the value that could be taken through force is gone, right? So the incentive is dramatically diminished because so much of the value, the wealth has gone into this domain. And I think that's tremendously encouraging for there being less violence than one might otherwise think there would be when things fall apart. And it's just kind of like the typical like fear of anarchism that most normies might feel.
And to your point, like when you think about this as a, instead of a, like, we have a problem with property rights. Let's the idea that you have a great incentive based culture, that now, let's just say you're a property owner like myself, like out here, if I want to give some of my property to somebody or allow somebody to come, hey, here's a piece of property, you can buy it from me and you can now become part of this community. And now what you're doing is you're fostering the community. You're literally being that person that welcomes in some of the best into your community. And I think, being the receptive end of that, where if you're the person who's requesting maybe to purchase a piece of property from somebody on that land, you maybe put in certain conditions as how this is going to work. But that person, especially if it's, a really, really nice place to be, those people are going to be, or feel some sort of debt as well, right? Is like they're going to want to contribute in a positive way to that society, so that they're not looked at as like a malinvestment or a maladdition to that society as well. So it fosters this culture of, giving a younger guy a chance. Hey, here's a small parcel.
Right.
As you age and you're able to take care of more, then maybe here's more. And that relationship, that building up of the next generation, or the, whatever it is, I think, something that, when this whole thing compounds and we start to see the network effect of how this will work naturally, is just going to be, I mean, it's going to be something else to live through.
Totally. Let me tell me what you think about this, because I think along that line of thinking, that the incentive to use power or force to acquire property will be greatly diminished. But you know, the refrain would be, yeah, but there's still going to be things of value outside of Bitcoin that people with power will have an incentive to take. And you mentioned like there's a reputational dynamic there that would disincentivize that. And I also think the available resources to pursue a given the balance of resources to pursue the good and the so-called good incentive versus the bad, I think are going to be so, it's possible that they're going to be so imbalanced in favor of resources available to pursue and uphold the good incentives, in this case to defend, that they're going to so outweigh the resources available to pursue the aggressive incentives, that maybe it's the case that, like, yes, there will, you know, it will still be possible to steal from people in certain ways, but there's going to be so many more resources available for defense, i.e. available for the maintenance of property rights,
Yeah.
um, that should countervail anyone, the minority of people who would seek to use power to, you know, for nefarious or aggressive or, violating property right purposes.
It's kind of too. Have you ever seen Antonopoulos get up there and talk about the double spend? It's kind of one of his
Probably. Yeah. Not for
famous
a while
videos,
though.
right? Yeah, and he talks about the amount of money that it would take to make an incursion like this, and what you get one double spend, yay, kind of that idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you start to think about an incursion in terms of property rights, if you have some other types of resources, let's just say, the Bitcoin nations go to war with the BRICS nations. And I'm not saying, you just hypothetically, right? Um, let's say you want to pierce a community and you want to grab a swath of property. Well, you may have the resources to make that initial pierce, but now you run into a logistics problem. At some point, somewhere, you're going to have a backup logistics. It becomes much more local and is supported by the local people. And we learned this lesson in Afghanistan and Iraq and probably a bunch of other places. But when we were there, logistically, that is a nightmare. That is a nightmare to keep that many people in a place through force and coercion for 20 years. It was a nightmare, and nobody wanted to get out of it for another reason. But when you look at that here in the United States, people who have far more sophisticated equipment, have tons and tons and tons of arms at their disposal, and know their local suppliers, whether it's gas or food or whatever it is that sustains an invading type of force that it would take to just make the penetration. Boy, you want to talk about the welcome, wearing out very quickly. The attacks, the what you've done in terms of disrupting this society that was finding, and maybe not, utopia, but maybe a little bit of harmony, a little bit of balance, something that they recovered from in this crazy time. When things, when we get to a Bitcoin standard or hyper Bitcoinization, and we start to see the wheels turn in our local societies, and somebody comes in and tries to threaten that, oh my God, I feel so sorry for those people to a degree, to the degree that I'm just, it's it's going to be over after the initial piercing, because I think not only did those people respond, but I think the people in the neighboring areas respond as well and say this can't happen, right? Like, this is now outrageous to a degree that you've got possibly an entire region motivated to say, hey, here's our resources. We're going to give you through consent and peace, and we're coming down to make a stand to say, hey, enough is enough. You got to leave, one way or another. You don't want to escalate this. I think once you see that switch turn, for the life of me, I think back to the anti-federalists when they lost the the war to the Federalists, and in 1891, is they didn't want to centralize. They didn't want to centralize. They were prophets on what was going to happen if we centralized. And now to see us recover from that, to start the recovery of centralization down to decentralization, I think this is going to be the piece that a lot of people don't understand, because at first they don't understand history, and they don't understand, what this, positive incentive structure is actually capable of after seeing how bad it's going to be under this malincentive structure that we have now. Like, when they finally turn the page and they go, oh, we get it, and it's happening, and good stuff is going on now, boy, I think that's very, very hard to turn back.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good segue into this last one I have for you, which is, I think, I'm not sure if we were recording or not when you mentioned it at the beginning, but you said, you insinuated you thought things were going to get pretty hairy pretty soon. And, actually, this was one of the reasons why you were quitting coffee, because you weren't sure you'd have a consistent supply or a reliable supply.
Right.
So what do you see, is happening or is going to happen? Hit me with your projection on things.
So I honestly, I think Al Gore kind of highlighted this during his rant at the WEF this week, right? In this past week, is he was talking about nuclear bombs and all these kind of stuff that, mostly polluting the climate. But if you kind of understand their language and read between the lines, I think what they want is to destroy self-governance on this planet. I think the idea of self-governance is not something that they want in the hands of the average man, woman, and child. And because time is running out, and because fiat buys less and less and will continue to buy less and less, and the more they print now, the more, inflation is going to go through the roof. That's, going to, to send popularity of these, politicians through the floor. Is the only way out of this for these guys is to decimate the human population. We've this past week we heard them talk about a catastrophic global cyber attack in terms of turning off the lights, basically turning off the energy grids. What is this within their power? I think it probably is. And if this is the case, and we're starting to see it in places like Pakistan already, and they're trying to get the population in the UK to use
what
less
happened?
power.
That was just today in Pakistan, right? The power's out for the whole country, or was out. I'm not sure how
I
long
don't
it
know
was
if it
for.
was, yeah, the entire country, and I believe they started getting some of it restored. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we haven't gone a week, and now we've got most of India out, or most of Pakistan out, you're just sitting there going, a lot of times they do test runs on people that don't really have a lot of the measures to do anything back. Unfortunately, I think Pakistan does have some measures in terms of nuclear arms and everything, but I honestly think that these megalomaniac psychopaths are going to go for broke at some point. I don't know how far it gets. I don't know if it starts with the Russia Ukraine thing. But to me, that seems like the fault line right now. And if I'm looking at this militarily, if I can begin a thermonuclear war with, the Baltic states over there, then what we have is more and more and more people who are now fleeing that area. Now, borders don't mean a thing. And at that point, I think what they want to do is step in as a global governance issue, and, maybe a global CBDC at that point. And I think, that's what we're up against in the near future. I think there's a darkness that we're going to have to push through. I don't think it's, incapable of just understanding the human spirit the way I do. I mean, between the generators, between the know-how, the ingenuity, the hard times, like what I've seen people do, especially in the Gulf states here in America, when times are tough and catastrophic events happen, people kind of band together and they come up with some really ingenious types of ability to help each other out. So I think it's coming. I think 2023 is probably going to be the year where there's too much information going around too fast now that's exposed to a lot of these people. They don't have an answer for Bitcoin. And I think that scares the hell out of them. I think they understand very well that, value moves quickly. And if people see Bitcoin as a store of value that they can't take, they can't interrupt, that absolutely neuters them of most of their world power, then, one of the things you have to do is first and foremost prevent the blowback that's going to take them out, and see something like a Nuremberg 2, where a lot of these guys get sentenced to death and hung for the COVID crimes. But then on top of that, now if the world financial system starts to collapse and people can't get their money out of banks, their 401ks are shut, there's no social security, the United States is somewhere around $250 trillion in debt anyway, in terms of unfunded liabilities. And what are you going to do? And the only thing to do is probably get rid of most of the population. And I say that because I've seen how they treat veterans. You go from being an asset to a liability. They throw pills at the situation and get you off the ledger. Like, that's it. Right. So if now you have most of the boomer generation, maybe even some Gen Xers that are starting to get into that social security age, boy, you don't want to be on their ledger at that point, is what I'm saying. And I think they're vast and evil enough to do those things. I know, it's crazy.
Okay. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it's not a centrally orchestrated anything that's happening. Let's assume that it's, we're a bunch of imperfect and largely incompetent human beings are subject to a corrupt and imperfect system. And what we're seeing now is just the inevitable chaos of those two things operating, engage, with one another. if that is the case, maybe this is kind of an impossible question, but like, how do you see things playing out if that were the case? Like, if there was less intention and more incompetence and faulty faulty systems engineering, let's say, how do you see things playing out?
Well, I think much the same way, honestly. I think just because there will be some sort of violent event somewhere, that 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 might be the precipice for unification. I mean, God, we saw in America after 9/11, we saw, everybody was like, yeah, I mean, wrong answer, by the way, like wrong answer. Hopefully we don't do that. But there was a unification. There was like, this cannot be, this cannot stand, this is outrageous. And I think that's probably what you start to see is just because there's a lot of incompetence. I think Jerome Powell is fairly incompetent, right? I think that guy is wildly out of his depth in what he's trying to do now. And so, if they were trying to do the right thing and they were smart, they'd try to adopt a Bitcoin standard. And that's not obviously what they're doing. But yeah, I think what you see is a vast decentralization down to the local level, where now you're hyper focused on making sure that your community is more robust, it's more anti-fragile, and that means doing a lot of hard work yourself, but also doing the anti-fragile charity work that is going to have to be done. So I think I think all of this lends itself to helping the Bitcoiners, the hyper Bitcoinization of the world. It might actually just be the catalyst that pushes it all, and that's okay. Like as soon as, like I said earlier, I think this kind of folds into it is once you have that catalyst where people turn the corner in some communities. El Salvador, right? El Salvador's never going back. Also, I mean, they've got people who are actually paying their taxes, and they shame them on national television. That's amazing. They shame
You mean
giant,
who don't pay their taxes?
right.
Yeah.
They shame giant corporations on television to pay their taxes. Their crime rates through the floor. There's repatriation for the first time ever in El Salvador. You think El Salvador is ever going back to a different way? I don't think so. Like, I think that now that they've seen this corner that's turned because of Bitcoin, boy, I don't see them ever going back. And I think that's probably going to spread through a very decentralized way around the world. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope you're right. And I think true freedom is, even though most people may have a hard time spotting it at first, when you feel it, it's perhaps the most enticing thing that there is. And now that we're engaging technologies that make it more ubiquitous, make it more available to everybody, then stands to reason more people are going to get to feel that sensation, and they're probably going to like it. And hopefully they're going to demand more of it and orient their life around it. So, well, maybe that's the hopeful note that we end on instead of the one you formally articulated.
Yeah, it was a terrible way to end the
show. But man, it's been great chatting with you. I appreciate you coming on and making the time today. And we should do it again sometime. Give it a little space in between, and then we'll get together sometime in 2023 and see how many of your predictions came to pass. Hopefully we're still able to communicate by then.
I want to be wrong. John, hey, man, thanks for the platform. It was great speaking with you and having some fun, man. I really appreciate it, and love to have you on my show as well. So, man, appreciate everything you're doing for Bitcoin.
Thank you, brother. And yeah, we'll chat again sometime. Take care.
Peace.